and by 34 kilometers of treacherous open sea. It was a radical idea to dig a tunnel connecting them 100 meters below the rocky seabed. At stake, billions of pounds and the lives of 8,000 tunnelers. If it worked, it would be the world's longest undersea tunnel. But with terrifying floods, a horrific fire, and financial meltdown, the Channel Tunnel would dice with disaster right from the start.
Okay, so this is something I just wanted to put out there real quick. It's actually something I've been chewing on for some time now, maybe several months since I first started thinking about the question of the Eurotunnel. So I guess we could call this just a page out of the diary of my random flat earth curiosities or whatever. So basically I've been wanting to look into this. Basically I've been kind of interested in the idea of the Eurotunnel or Channel Tunnel or whatever you want to call it, since listening to the various interviews with surveyors that I'm sure many of you have listened to. Several of these men who have come out now and talked about working their entire career never having accounted for the curve. So obviously projects like the Channel Tunnel, and there's a few others that are out there, like in Japan. These are especially interesting because obviously they're underground, and so they involve a very different process in terms of surveying and calculations, in terms of it has to be very precise, and you're not just following the contours of the ground. It has to be even more precise, especially in the case of tunneling under a large body of ocean water, where the risk of collapse and the ocean water leaking in is an extremely real issue. So you would think that in a project like the Eurotunnel, that compensation for curvature would be paramount, and having to make sure that you didn't make a miscalculation and wind up tunneling too close to the bottom of the channel and endangering the lives of everyone involved. So I was curious, wanting to calculate, what the expected curvature should be for that amount of water and the length of the tunnel itself. The channel distance is 37 kilometers, and when you convert that into miles and calculate the curvature using inches, which is the way I'm accustomed to doing it, you come up with 349 feet of expected curvature. Now the tunnel itself, of course, is longer than the body of water because it enters in further inland. And so the full length of the tunnel from one entrance to another is 50.5 kilometers. And again, when you convert that into miles and calculate the expected curvature, you're looking at 656 feet of expected curvature. So I think most people who are already looking into the issue of curvature would probably already see why this would be of interest, because while that might not seem like a lot, and I know the detractors are already would just assume that this is just already being accounted for. In every documentary that I have now watched on this subject, and every thing online I could find where I was reading, I've just been looking everywhere I could to try and find mention of calculation of the curvature, and of course I have not found anything. So that in itself isn't proof, but it is, of course, very interesting. In all the pictorial depictions of, the Channel Tunnel from the side view, of course, the water is always depicted as a perfectly flat surface. In these 3D models, as far as I can tell, they are depicted as flowing under a flat surface. And then there's another clip I'm going to play at the end here, where they're talking to the head surveyor of the Eurotunnel project, and he doesn't mention curvature at all either. So this is really interesting when you're dealing with two sides that are tunneling from opposite directions, and the idea is to meet precisely in the middle at the predicted point under a massive amount of ocean water. Calculations have to be. There's no way that they could do this without calculating for curvature, because the idea is that they are, they have to remain low enough below the seabed. And then, but if the water level is curving, then yeah, so there's real risk involved. Not only that, but like in all these depictions where, you know, the tunnel, because of the way that they have to follow the sediment, it doesn't go in a straight line down and then flatten out at the bottom and then a straight line up. It moves up and down and kind of snakes to go with this blue chalk layer that they tunnel through. So it makes it very hard to calculate the angles, which was basically the thing I was looking for, and so that's why I'm making this video, to basically throw it out there for other researchers to hopefully kind of jump on this and see what they can find, because that's really the missing key. That's really the data that I couldn't even find, was the gradient, the grade, the angle of decline and ascent, from one side down to the center point and then up again, because it changes many times throughout. It's not, like I said, it's not a straight, so it's not a simple thing to calculate. So that's kind of where I'm at, because what's interesting, when you look at 656 feet of expected curvature, just to put that into perspective, that's essentially the height of 2 Big Ben towers put on top of each other, which almost would make the tunnel itself much closer to a straight line than having to dip down and then climb all the way back up. I mean, obviously, I don't believe the entrances are claimed to be exactly the same altitude from sea level as each other, but still, what is sea level? Is sea level being, is sea level across the project being considered to be one, a flat thing, or is it a relative thing depending on where you are, in accordance with the curve? So from where I stand, the projects like this are really interesting and probably deserving of a lot more intense scrutiny from just kind of people as a whole. So I feel like I've kind of tapped out on, I've kind of burned out on just reading about it and watching things on it. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot more to be ripped out of this, and I'm kind of curious to see what other people can find and what other specific calculations they can make in terms of, I've never been through the tunnel or whatever, but I wonder if there's even a way you could calculate, decline and ascent from actually riding on it, if you had just your smartphone with a level app or, whatever. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking for help and input and feedback, and I'm just curious what other people think about this. So here's another clip, just kind of, again, talking with that surveyor and the whole method of how they were calculating their direction as they dug the tunnel. So thanks for watching.
Disastrous. Flooding, or worse, tunnel collapse. It was imperative that the TBMs were guided along a safe and accurate route. That meant conducting one of the world's longest and most in-depth underground surveys. Rewind to August 1986, 18 months before tunneling began. When surveyor Eric Radcliffe took on the job of plotting the tunnel's course, he knew the scale of the challenge he faced.
France, you can see over there, that's the French coast. So we had all that way to drive the tunnel and keep it online for that 38 kilometers. Actually, from here it doesn't look too bad, but it's a long way.
Plotting an accurate course over such a long distance underground is a surveyor's nightmare. In tunnels, the normal rules of surveying don't apply. Surveyors normally work by measuring a series of angles at control points along the route. It's all a matter of geometry. Above ground, with 360-degree visibility, plotting a course is relatively simple. Eric Radcliffe explains the difference.
The whole road is opened to the air. All the survey control points from which you do the setting out are already established over the whole length.
Underground, there are obvious complications. All the surveyors can see is a wall of rock. They can't see ahead to plot the course. Roads have one other plus point over tunnels. Because they're flat strips on the landscape, they can only go off course in two directions, left or right. A tunnel occupies a three-dimensional space underground. It can go off course not only left or right, but also up or down. The two halves of the Channel Tunnel had 4 potential ways to miss meeting up. It's like asking a golfer to sink a hole-in-one blindfolded from 34 kilometers. To keep the tunnel on course and on target, the surveyors had to use a secret weapon: geology. Along its underground route, the tunnel would be driven through a layer cake of different soil and rock types with very different consistencies. The geologists needed one stratum that went right across the channel. This stratum would provide a trail to help keep the British and the French tunnellers on course. But it must be exactly the right type of rock for tunnelling. Jean-Luc Desaisnes was one of the geophysicists charged with tracing the perfect stratum for the tunnel to follow. On the French side of the channel, Desaisnes began his search. It would have to be waterproof to resist flooding, and compact enough so it wouldn't collapse during the dig. In these cliffs, Desaisnes found his prize. Water poured over this seam of rock without soaking in, evidence that it was waterproof.
The soft rock, impervious, so no water in the tunnel. This is a perfect situation for boring a tunnel.
It's called blue chalk. But it was one thing to identify the ideal rock, another to discover its course. Geologists drilled a series of boreholes into the seabed and dropped probes that fired sound waves deep underground. The aim, to measure changes of speed in the sound waves as they passed through different rock and soil layers. It sounds straightforward, but it wasn't. Tracing the course of the blue chalk meant sinking 12 of these boreholes right across the channel, a tricky task in one of the world's busiest sea lanes.
You have a high traffic of vessels.